You know that person who never goes over the speed limit, the one who takes their time, stays in their lane, leaves plenty of space in front, never rushes, never races, and just drives. And people have noticed. Maybe they said something, or maybe they just gave you a look. Why are you going so slow? Come on, move it. Get out of the fast lane. And somewhere underneath all of it is a question you may have wondered about yourself. Am I actually the problem on the road? Or do I simply see driving differently from everyone else? Because there is something interesting about people who consistently drive slowly, and it may have less to do with driving and more to do with how they make decisions. Let's be honest about what people assume. When someone sees you driving slowly, they often make a quick judgment. Maybe they think your reactions aren't as good anymore. Maybe they think you're nervous. Maybe they think you don't know how to drive. Or they think you're the problem. You're holding everyone up. You're making traffic worse. And you should just speed up and keep pace. And sometimes, those assumptions might be true. A person can drive slowly because they're inexperienced, distracted, or simply unsure of themselves. But that's not the interesting group. I'm talking about the person who chooses to drive slowly, the person who could go faster but doesn't see a good reason to. And psychology gives us some interesting clues about why. Think about merging onto a busy highway. You check the mirror, then you check it again, you wait for the right gap, and you ease into the lane. And just as you settle in, someone appears behind you, too close, and already impatient. They want you to go faster. You can feel the pressure, but you don't respond to it. They may think you're too cautious, but you may simply be thinking, I have somewhere to go, and I don't need to turn this into a race. And that's an important difference. Some people are naturally more attracted to excitement, stimulation, and risk. Psychologists call one part of this sensation seeking. Research on driving behavior has found that sensation-seeking and impulsive traits are linked with a greater tendency to speed. That doesn't mean every fast driver is reckless, but it does suggest something interesting. For some people, speed itself can be rewarding. For others, it isn't. They don't need the road to feel exciting. They just want to get where they're going. And then there's risk perception. Two people can look at the exact same road and see two completely different things. One person sees an empty stretch of road. The other sees a parked car that could suddenly pull out. One sees a green light, and the other notices the pedestrian standing near the crossing. One sees an opportunity to overtake, while the other thinks, what if something comes around that corner? Neither person is necessarily wrong. They're simply calculating risk differently. Research on driving behavior has found that how people perceive risk can influence the speed they choose, and the slower driver may simply be more comfortable trading a little time for a little more control. Think about a parking lot. You're moving slowly between parked cars, not because you can't go faster, but because you know what can appear from behind a vehicle without warning. A child, a shopping cart, a door opening, or someone reversing without looking. The person behind you taps the horn, but you don't speed up. You've learned something that impatient drivers sometimes forget. The road doesn't care how late you are. A few extra seconds may feel annoying, but once something goes wrong, those seconds can suddenly become very valuable. And this is where careful driving has a strange psychological advantage. When you're careful, usually nothing happens. Nobody congratulates you, nobody notices, and nobody says, "Great job, you slowed down before that intersection." You simply arrive, and because nothing happened, people assume there was nothing to notice. But maybe that's exactly what careful driving looks like. Nothing happened. Again, and again, and again. Now think about driving with your family. Maybe your children are in the back, or maybe your grandchildren. You know exactly who is sitting in that car. Suddenly, the calculation changes. That extra 10 miles per hour doesn't feel as important anymore. Getting there 5 minutes earlier doesn't feel worth much, because you're no longer thinking only about yourself. You're thinking about the people who trusted you enough to sit beside you, and that can change how someone drives, not because they're afraid, but because they have something they value more than speed: responsibility. Here's another interesting thing about slow drivers. They may be less willing to let someone else's urgency become their urgency. Imagine someone riding your bumper for half a mile. They're practically communicating, "Go faster." And you could, but you don't. Not because you're trying to annoy them, but because you simply don't believe their impatience should control your decisions. Psychologists know that people are influenced by social pressure all the time. We copy other people's behavior, we adjust ourselves to the group, we don't want to look strange, and we don't want to hold people up. But sometimes the person driving slowly has already decided, "I am responsible for my driving, and you are responsible for yours." And that's a personality trait worth noticing. Not stubbornness, just a willingness to make your own decision even when someone else is pushing you toward another one. And what about the time you're supposedly saving? Imagine a 20-mile journey. Driving at 60 miles per hour, it takes about 20 minutes. At 70 miles per hour, roughly 17 minutes. 3 minutes saved. That's what the horn was for, that's what the tailgating was for, and that's what the constant lane changing was for. 3 minutes. And tomorrow, most people won't even remember those 3 minutes. But the person driving slowly may have spent the entire journey with relaxed shoulders, hands comfortably on the wheel, and no need to prove anything. They didn't win the race because they weren't racing. And sometimes, there's another reason you drive the way you do. You love your car. To the person behind you, it's just a car. To you, it might be the car that took your children to school, the car you drove on your first family vacation, or the car that's been sitting in your driveway for 20 years. You've changed the oil, replaced the tires, and fixed the little things before they became big things. You know its sounds, and you know when something doesn't feel right. So when the road opens up, you don't automatically put your foot down. Why would you? You don't need to prove what the car can do. You've spent years taking care of it, and maybe that's another thing people misunderstand about you. You don't always use things until they're broken. Sometimes you slow down because you want them to last. And this may explain something bigger. The person who drives slowly may sometimes be the same person who doesn't rush other parts of life. They might keep a car for 20 years, they might repair something instead of immediately replacing it, or they might stay in the same home because they don't need something bigger just to impress people. They might take longer to make an important decision, all the same instinct, deliberate over reactive, present over hurried, long-term thinking over immediate reward. That instinct shows up everywhere. The car is just where other people finally notice it. So are you actually the problem on the road? Maybe sometimes. If you're driving far below the safe flow of traffic, or failing to keep pace when conditions require it, then slow isn't automatically safer. But if you're driving at a reasonable speed, paying attention, leaving space, and refusing to let another driver's impatience control you, then maybe you're not doing anything wrong. Maybe you simply have a different relationship with risk, a different relationship with time, and a different idea of what a successful journey looks like, because the success of caution is almost always invisible. Nobody sees the accident you didn't have. Nobody sees the risk you chose not to take, and nobody sees the moment you chose patience instead of impulse. They only see you going slowly. But you know what happened. Nothing. Again and again and again. 40 years of everyone in that car arriving home safely every single time. They call that slow, and somewhere in the back of that car, there are people who will never know how many times your unhurried hands kept them safe. They don't need to know. You do. Do you drive fast or slow? Tell us about one time you were glad you didn't rush in the comments. I read every single one.